Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders. Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Elizabeth Wheel. Elizabeth is the founder and managing director of Scribble Ventures, an early-stage venture firm that focuses on pre-seed through Series A investments. Previously, she was a managing director at 137 Ventures, a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, and an executive at Twitter during a period of hypergrowth as it scaled from 50 to 3,000 people. She has invested in more than 60 technology companies across all stages, including Slack, Whatnot, SpaceX, Coinbase, and Gusto. Elizabeth graduated from Stanford University with a BA in economics and a master's in engineering. She is also an entrepreneur, having started Paperwheel, a design and letterpress company. If that's not enough, Elizabeth is a competitive ultra-marathon runner and has run more than 100 marathons. And last, but definitely not least, she is a very dear mentor of mine that I am lucky to have. So Elizabeth, I don't know if you know this, but this is actually my 100th episode. So I feel very, very special to have you on the show. Thank you for joining. How's it going?
Wow. Well, thank you, but huge congratulations to you. That is
Of course.
episode.
Thank you. So I like to start first, set the scene. Where are you in the world? What's going on?
Where am I in the world? I live in Portola Valley, California. So stone's throw from Stanford campus and Menlo Park area. My husband and I bought our home in Portola actually in 2007, before we were even married, because there's more running trails than roads in Portola Valley. And fortunately, we live here now because the one thing I do have is 6-year-old twins and an 8-year-old, and they have quite a bit of energy. So having some space is quite nice right now.
Amazing. So, Elizabeth, I always love to start. Take me back to your childhood. Take me back to 5-year-old Elizabeth. Who were you? What were you like? What was exciting to you then?
Oh, yes. Some things they just stay in you too, and it's now very scary to see some of the things that I was like as a little kid now popping up in my children across 3 different personalities. But I grew up in a little town about 20 minutes from Sacramento, California, called Orangevale, and I have an older sister who's actually 8 years older, so very much a childhood. There are lots of parts that it felt more only child than actually siblings, because of that. My mom was a second grade teacher at our neighborhood school down the street, and my dad was a marine biologist. God knows why we were dropped in Sacramento, but he actually worked around oil spill cleanup and response. So we're in Sacramento. I've lived in the same house my entire life. My mom actually still lives there. And one of the big things, I was always really, my mom said that I had the desire to do everything, and I had the desire to do everything perfectly. And that was going to either kill me or make me stronger and hopefully successful.
Yeah.
So I was a very busy kid, but compared to what the stories I've heard about my sister, uh, my mom could tell me to stay in my room as a 2-year-old, and I would just play and do things. And I was very responsible. I always had my homework in my backpack, like a week before it actually was due. I, Nobody ever had to nag on me for anything. I never had a curfew. But my dad, by hobby, was a woodworker, and we had a great woodworking studio in one of the areas of our garage. So he'd always be out there, and I'd always be out there. And I love tinkering. I love building. I could do that all day long still. And when I was small, I actually started a woodworking business. So my parents got divorced actually when I was in second grade. So right 7 years old. And for that first holiday, my dad gave me a scroll saw for Christmas. So I was a 7 year old with a scroll saw. And for my birthday, gave me a drill. So then I was armed with, some good solid power tools. And
Yeah.
I started, tinkering, building. I started this line of pins that were cut out of wood. I painted them and I sold them on my mom's staff room table for $10 a piece. So each holiday, I would pocket like more than, $400 and squirrel it away. And I was also one of those. I was a saver. I put every dollar under my bed in a coffee can.
Wow.
And so that was very much me, but I loved doing things. I loved learning. I would cook. I would do, wood.
Yeah.
I would do science experiments, potions. And then the thing that rounded it out, my mom and I started running when I was 9. And that's been a lifelong part of me as well.
Wow. And we'll get to that and it'll come up again. But first of all, it's so clear, even the entrepreneurial spirit in a way was from a very young age of just building your own and releasing it and whatnot, which is so cool to see. And tell me, at what age did you get your first job at? I think it's Noah's Bagels, but correct me. At what point was that? And what did you learn from that first job?
Oh my goodness, such a fond time too. So yes, the first real job, I say, I was 15 and a half. So the day I could get my work permit, I was knocking
Wow.
on the door at Noah's Bagels. And I joke now, this was in roughly, uh, I don't know, the late 1990s, because I was in early high school and actually summer before, I believe. And it was back when carbs were cool as well. So bagel stores are like the hot spot. And it was on the way to school in our, neighborhood shopping center with the grocery store and things. And I begged, I was like, put me to work. And the manager gave me a job and I was, essentially bagel cutter. And then grew into shift manager. I was the youngest person there, a lot of bagel shops. It was a lot of,
Yeah.
you know, not people that were as driven. And I worked there for all 4 years, ultimately became assistant manager there, and then was running 2 stores. And when our manager would go somewhere, like I was always the one in charge. And I just loved it. I then started doing inventory and taking over more manager responsibilities.
Yeah.
I would work at 4 a.m. before school. I would go after school as well. I got to see so much of my community as they made their way to high school, and it's pretty cool being the one that can bring a bag of bagels to events. So you always went to interesting things.
Yeah.
It was such a blast having a small team. Ultimately, and a story that not many people know, but I gotten into Stanford early decision, and we'll get to that part of my life at some point.
Yeah.
Uh, but the manager actually asked if I would meet with the head of all of California, and they actually asked me to defer Stanford and open a Noah's Bagels in San Francisco on the Embarcadero.
Wow.
San Francisco one. And my mom actually said I could if I wanted to. And I thought about it and I explored it. And I would have been making $40,000 a year, and that was more than anyone in my family had ever made. So
Yeah.
it was a big job. But ultimately, I did not stick on with those bagels, and I went to Stanford instead.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I did not know that part to it, which is super fascinating. And I think, okay, even before Stanford, actually, I want to touch on was it the concept of just working hard, getting money, saving it, like you saw the true value of money, it seems like, at an early age, or was it more just that community aspect, getting to know everyone, almost making a big world feel small? What aspect really spoke to you?
Yeah, a big theme that I think both, to answer the question, but
Yeah.
a big theme of what my mom really showed me, and after the divorce, I lived entirely with my mom, and she's a super active person. She's actually turning 80 this weekend. I'm throwing her an 80th birthday. She's
Amazing.
running 5 miles a day. She's still swimming every morning, and it
Wow.
was this. and this touches even on the sport part of my life, but she always had, something that she did, and it was very much routine. And I'm also a creature of habit. But one of the things I think she did exceptionally well, and I didn't realize this until looking back now, and it's something I try to show my children as well, is, well, what I've now say is like making a big world feel small. But she knew the coffee shop owner, and then she knew her librarian at the library. She knew our deli sandwich maker, our mailman. We knew our garbage man. All of
Yeah.
these, and in such a world that we live in now, with all how fast it's moving, it's easy to just have it be a faceless place. And I don't like that. And also, my children and I went to our garbage man's wedding actually a few years ago. And it's like,
Oh my
people in
God.
the community make your community work. So you should know them by name, and you should know like about them and their families. So the plugging in with part of my community was definitely a thing. But
Yeah.
then I really liked that act of making money. I
Yeah.
think, my mom was very, very cost conscious, and I saw value of a dollar early on, but then maybe I took it to another notch. So I liked making money, but I really liked saving money.
Yeah.
No one in my family that was really into business, and so they still kind of wonder why I rode my bike to the bank and started a savings account, and then why, like, I got on the phone with Vanguard when I was 14 and started asking them about how to set up a Roth IRA. So I did these weird things. I have no idea still how I got that bug in my head, but I think I liked the both.
Yeah. Okay, so you go to Stanford. At this point, did you know about this world of tech and startups and venture capital? And you come from parents who like marine biology, and your mom's a teacher. How were you thinking of career, and what was that pivotal shift where you were like, wow, there's a whole new world that I love?
Yeah, a few layers of that, most definitely. But my mom went to UCLA and my dad went to USC. So my extended family is also in Southern California. Every aunt, uncle, cousin, grandparent parent went to either USC or UCLA. Most of UCLA. So it's like basically I thought I would be a Bruin just because.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't know Stanford existed. I never even knew like what a private school versus not. I was opened my eyes to Stanford my sophomore year of high school when I actually ran a cross country meet on the campus. And my mom drove me there. I thought like this place is pretty. I had no idea what the word really meant.
Yeah.
And then I learned it was a pretty good school. And when you're starting to apply, I mean, it was such a pipe dream because who gets into Stanford? And I applied early decision. And I remember my mom saying, like, looking terrified, but saying, like, we'll find a way to make it work. I don't know how she thought you'd
Right.
hit. So I applied early, and that's back when it was binding. So once you got in, you had to, pull all of your other applications from other schools. And I got an early decision in December. And I remember my mom being utterly terrified because basically there was no way to pay for this yet. And I was applying for every scholarship under the sun, like $2,000 from Discover Card and $5,000 from Tylenol. I mean, the weird things that I dug up.
Yeah.
And then in March, I actually was awarded a full ride scholarship by a private foundation. And that's really what enabled me to go to Stanford and take advantage of both an undergrad degree and a master's degree that I knew very little about. But I got there and just absolutely loved it and thrived. But the layer and the truth of how I actually was open, my eyes to all of tech in the Valley was a program within the engineering school called the Mayfield Fellows Program. And it arms 10 or so engineering students primarily, and really gives you a business boot camp
Yep.
over a 9 month period. And you're paired with a VC mentor and a CEO mentor, and you work in a venture backed startup through the summer. And I was actually supposed to go to a consulting firm. And then I got into the Mayfield Fellows program. And by needing to work at a venture backed startup for the summer, like that was basically the option at hand. And it seems so risky compared to a big, well heeled consulting firm. But
Right.
took that leap, and worked at a little company called Auction Drop. This is back in 2003. You drop it off, you sell it on eBay. And it seemed like a really great thing. But when I walked in the door to interview, it seemed like a very fun place to be. And it was the
Yeah.
team and the hustle and this excitement. And I joined as the eighth person. And you just realize being a young person at a small, fast growing company, how much you can do. And that was, I think, really what empowered me to know that tech was for me. Like you can ask good questions, but you can have this tenacity and the ability to be a self starter and just go, like ask permission when you need it, but just
Right.
like, wow. And how much fun I had during those couple of years as I rounded out school and before, starting at Menlo Ventures, ultimately after graduation with my master's. So that's
Yeah.
really what made me take advantage of, the Silicon Valley, tech, and more.
Yeah, I love it. So first, even full circle moment. So I obviously met you through Mayfield Fellows. You were my VC mentor, and the app like really just made my Mayfield experience. It was the most special time ever, and even more so, the power of that program. I went into Stanford thinking I would do pre med. Didn't know about this world at all. But the Mayfield Fellows program also really just introduced me to this world and leadership and impact and the excitement of a startup and the messiness of it all. So anyway, we'll get into all of that. By the way, another thing, my sisters went to UCLA as well. So we have that Bruin connection there too. So after Mayfield, after experiencing that startup, what made you go to Menlo Ventures versus, kind of go down that startup route? Or even more than that, did you ever have an itch to say like, I want to start something and I want to do it on my own?
Oh, yes. And I think back to some of my masters, like we were actually starting a company and it was kind of in a Quora-ish world ever before Quora. And I'd actually forgotten that until now, but I found some of the docs on my computer and I was like, oh my goodness, what could have been? Uh, but what made me go to Menlo? I
Yeah.
did it at that point of like jobs you're applying to, because at this point you're just like, I need to get a job. Like my health insurance is gonna, turn off at some point being on
Yep.
my and I looked at it in three camps. It was like you go the startup route, you go to the big company like a Google and Yahoo at the time, like Yahoo was cool then,
Yeah.
and or you go to venture. And I had gotten to know a little bit about that. And I had a few irons in the fire of each of those categories. And I was interviewing and talking to some fun startups. I was interviewing at some of the bigger or thinking about, getting plugged into some of the bigger companies and taking a gamble there. And then I got this email to the Mayfield Fellows list, the alumni list, actually, of all things. It said Menlo Ventures was hiring. And I thought, well, that sounds like a kind of cool job description. Threw my hat in the ring, and it was a
Yeah.
very weird process. And something I say now, coming from the venture side, like venture is such a black box. Like you could be hired in 6 days, 6 years, 6 weeks from getting to know the team. Like there's no real timeline for hiring.
Yeah.
And I met three of the partners at Menlo on a Monday. And then they called me back and I met three more on the second Monday. And then I met the last three on the third Monday and they gave me an offer. And it was
Wow.
a 3 week process. And I was like, well, it doesn't sound bad. And it's like, I don't know. I'm going to learn and it's good people. And it kind of all the axes now that I look on, it struck well on. And so I took the leap and I started. Uh,
Yeah.
and it just became like jokes. I was an analyst at Menlo Ventures and I worked for all nine partners back when there were nine of them. And we were a stage agnostic firm on Sandhill. And it was 2006. And I was this giant funnel of talking to companies. And it's back in the, I mean, you think of even where the internet was at that point. Like people don't even remember red herring. But instead of like reading TechCrunch and all of these things that didn't exist then, it was like, here's a magazine on your desk about companies that are launching. And you would like tear out something and be like, I'm going to go look up that company and try to get them
Oh
on.
wow.
And it was just such a fun time. And it was,
And Elizabeth, so at that point, obviously it was a very quick process, which in a sense could almost be frightening in a way. Like, am I making the right decision?
Right.
And looking back now, what advice almost do you give those who, especially coming from Stanford or these top schools where you have the consulting path and the, like you said, the big tech companies, and then, maybe VC, or at that point it was even more risky, at that stage, it was so early. How do you think of it for choosing an early job in your career and making sure you're optimizing for the right things, but also making sure, you
Right.
love it and enjoy it? How do you think about all of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's something about a choice. Like at this point in a career when you're like, it's really hard to go wrong. If And now I look at it back more in a little framework about what's been the theme for every, transition point in my life and job. It's like number one is the people. And do you like them? Are they going to push you? Are you going to grow? Number
Yeah.
two for me was always location. And it's much more of a moot point now that we've seen what happens in the world and with work. But um, I say life's too short to have a long commute. There's too many things I like to do, my morning run, my family now, my other passions, hobbies, friends, etc.
Yeah.
Choose location. And number three for me was, am I learning? And anytime the learning curve flattened, that was usually the time it was about ready to go. And I look back on that Menlo uh, point. It's like, well, a decision is a decision. And there were all of these, like the world was our oyster. You're 20 something and you're like, you can do anything.
Right.
Was, number one, people. I enjoyed the team. I saw how they worked. They gave me, adventure is magical in a way. Like you are given keys to the castle. Like you sit at partner meeting, you have all the internal data. Like it's a cool spot to be. So people struck on location. I lived in Portola Valley and it was on Santo. And then three was I learning, and God, talk about learning like that
Yeah.
at the start.
And from the people aspect, and this can actually be applied in so many different, as an investor hat, evaluating founders, if you want to join an early stage startup, or like you said, it could be a small timeline. What are good, whether it's questions or key aspects for you to really get a sense of the people, right? Because even if you join, say, the Googles of the world, it's very different, the interview process to the actual work, to really get to know the team and whatnot. So how do you really determine, okay, these are the people I want to be around and want to work with?
And that's a spark that I actually really enjoy. But I like being able to connect and see. And there's something about like getting that in-person vibe too. Like you really
Yeah.
need, like, what does that culture feel like? It's different to all of us, but what does it feel like? What's the curiosity of that team? What are some of the drivers that are important to work for you? Uh, and getting that, sense of like, I'm like such a lifelong learner and the curiosity piece. And I think that like you just need to figure out what is that thing that kind of like you just know it when you feel it around certain people. And then I think the thing that I like to step back and look at is I really do believe that we become the average of the people we surround ourselves with. And that can be an evolution over time, but you need to be aware of that. And I even think now that I get to choose and set up Scribble in a way that I want to build a business in a way that makes me proud. And I want to spend my days loving what I do with the people that I do it. And really figuring out what's important to you. And is it certain places you like to spend your offsites, or is it conversations you like to have with what type of people? So I think there's just so many axes that you just kind of have to create that framework as you grow your career.
And do you find it more challenging now that we've somewhat gone into a remote world where you're meeting people and only getting to know them over Zoom versus in person? How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, I do, and I've done both, and I actually have to make investments without getting to meet those people live too.
Yeah.
I think the in person, especially in camera, there is something about that you do just get. You can get that feeling of what were the things you talked about, what's important.
Right.
This partner thing. I am a big believer in, you have a broad and robust network, so you can use it to see how to like use your network to figure out
Yeah.
about about how these folks are. And at some point, you have to take a leap. But I think if you listen to your gut, like that is a hugely important thing. And starting to guide that and doing that early, because the people is the number one thing in work, in life, and really trusting that gut.
I love it. I love it. So take me through the story. You then move on to Institutional Venture Partners, IVP. And so still down the VC route, but then Twitter happens. Take me through that kind of that story of how you discovered Twitter and made that leap too.
Yes. So I'd gotten married in the summer transition between my Menlo and IVP job, and I actually had the IVP role, and I was coming back from my honeymoon to start there, and I did, and that was in 2008. And then around Christmas time, we got to know this tiny little company called Twitter, and by early '09, we had made the investment. And I'd gotten to know the business from that side. I'd been a beta tester a couple years prior, actually back when I was cold calling Ev and Biz when they were actually working on a different company while I was at Menlo Ventures still.
Yeah.
I'd tweet,
Odeo, right? It was
yep.
Odeo. Yeah.
So I'd tweeted a few times, experimented, then gotten to know the business from the IVP work I'd done. And then a friend had gone over to work there and let me know that they needed somebody to start their analytics team. And my husband and I, Kevin, already married at the time, he is a big part of Scribble as well. But a big theme in life, we'd gotten married. He'd done his undergrad at Harvard, came out for his PhD at Stanford in theoretical particle physics. So God knows what he was thinking about and writing papers in the lab. But I said, oh, this little company, Twitter, they're starting their analytics team. And he went over and interviewed in early '09, got the job the following week, and started as an early engineer at Twitter. Uh, and it went slowly. So I was at IVP, he's at Twitter, and I found myself taking my laptop up to the Twitter office so much more. And then it was back before there, were there any locks or key fobs that you needed to get into the office. So I would go up and you'd be there for the company all hands on Fridays. And I started getting to know the team, and they were like putting me to work on, I was planning a team offsite. I was planning the company barbecue, like basically just doing things on the side. And I loved
Yeah.
people in the culture. And Ron Conway was spending a lot of time around the company as well. And I remember him saying to me at some point in a little conference room, like, why don't you just work here? And it seems so crazy. Like I have this well-heeled, fancy job. I have a
Right.
office on Sand Hill Road, and there was just something nutty about like this is so fun. I'm going to have the best time, and something's going to happen. And Dick Costolo, our CEO, had joined Twitter as the COO, and pretty soon they needed somebody to start the corp dev team. And I started talking to Dick, and this job kind of we created in some ways, like it was about time. They hadn't done not many acquisitions to date, and needed somebody to look after it. And so I came on in the end of 2009 when it was roughly 50 people at the time. Ultimately stayed through hypergrowth and just a fun period of over 4 years. And I wore so many hats. It was corp dev, biz ops, product marketing, anything under this non-edge. I made the soccer team t-shirts. I planned the wine cheese. It was just
I love it.
just do fun things. We had no children yet, and it was magical.
Yeah. And I hear so much about that early Twitter team, maybe the first 50, 100 people. It was special. There were special people there. What do you attribute that to? What do you think was so special about it? And then, even beyond that, now investing in these early startups, what do you think startups are now missing, maybe, of that cultural piece?
Good few questions there. So, one of the things that I give huge credit to is the early team at Twitter.
Yeah.
And Evan Biz, there is something about them and the early team. I think they did a phenomenal job, like really being careful, cautious, and intentional about the people that joined. Despite crazy hyper growth, it was so picky of who is a good fit here. I feel like
Yeah.
everyone made everyone else a little bit better by each edition. And I think if you go into hiring with that mentality, like the bar just keeps rising. And I joke that that early 100, maybe up to, couple hundred people, you would be eating in the kitchen or grabbing some a drink or something, and that person like made you smarter about something else too. And it's a big theme that I see in the Scribble portfolio as well with some of our early teams. But like, yes, you're exceptionally amazing at being this talented engineer. And then you also were like, yes, the Rubik's Cube champion or a world winner, or you played soccer at Stanford, or like
Yeah.
something that you're also exceptional at. And I think great early, like that is so fun because it builds such a robust culture. And that was one thing. And I think we over time arced like what are those values more on paper and what are we trying to strive for? And that was helpful. But then this drive of when the business is really like you're scaling and you need great people, and like there's this larger mission than just the product you're making. Like you would see Twitter in the world every day. You would see it doing impactful things. And even if it's something not at that scale with companies growing today, like showing that larger mission of why are you on the planet? Like what are you here to do? It can even be say tech software. But if you
Right.
able to extrapolate like what's that larger mission, I think that is so important for early teams.
Yeah.
Well, on the culture piece, I really like instilling this theory of like letting those culture carriers, those people that are those people, like can't really necessarily hire for them. It's not a job wreck. It's like that superpower that certain people on your team are going to have. Give them the ability and the runway to plan things, do things, have some budget, like really culminate that experience for people. Because I was, fortunate enough or dumb enough to just kind of like not ask permission. And all of a sudden, like I'm teaching wineries how to get on Twitter. So why don't I invite them in to do free wine tastings for our employees? And all of a sudden, like these things became wine tasting Tuesdays or like our soccer.
Right.
But if you put some care and a little bit of budget or just a little bit of like sweat labor into them, you really can start fostering a cool culture and having everyone really be a part of it.
Wow, I love that. I've also never heard, I love the term culture carrier. I've never heard that, and I think it's great. And so, from that, so it seems like it's almost a mix of amazing storytelling from the top of saying, conveying the mission and making sure everyone really feels it and understands it and work towards it. And then also that, on the ground, who is actually carrying that culture, who
Yeah.
is having it trickle through, which is great.
And that's
So,
a great
yeah,
reminder though on the sharing the history and the story, because that's something that Evan Biz also did exceptionally well. We finally had to essentially productize our onboarding because, I think my biggest class I was hiring, everyone we started having start on Mondays, and my biggest one was 45 or something one Monday.
oh
And
my God.
the first half hour after where's the bathroom and here's what to expect for the day. But the first half hour was the Twitter history and culture. And you shared that story of where did we come from? What have we done in the world? What to expect? What is this place like? And I loved giving that 30-minute presentation. I would sing. I still know what I said.
Yeah.
It
And
was spark of sharing like what had come before and what fabric are you coming into?
I love it. Oh, that is so great. And that is so applicable to founders too, whether they're starting at hiring their first 5 employees or 50, 100, 200. That's great. So, from my understanding, it sounds like this is an exciting time, an amazing time, but it seems like you got that itch to go back to the venture world, to go back to venture capital. You became a partner at Andreessen. Take me through that. What gave you that itch? What made you, have that jump?
Yeah. And it really takes getting to know yourself of what like makes you jump too. So I'd spent great years at Twitter and loved it, but 50 people is far different from 3,000 people.
Yeah.
And you know what type of person I talk with some of our founders now, like it might be time to let go of a certain employee. Like that's okay. There are people that fit certain times of companies' lives doing certain skills, and they're awesome at that, and they shouldn't be awesome at the other thing. Like, go do what you're awesome at. So I 3,000 is a lot of people. Um, and there's a lot of fun with that too, but it's a different place. And I'd actually gotten a call from Andreessen Horowitz, and they were getting ready to build out a team called Market Development. And really, this was back at a time when Andreessen Horowitz was putting operations at venture on the map. Like back in the day, venture firms did not have teams that helped you with marketing or PR or hiring, or like this wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a really exciting opportunity because the mandate at hand for market development at Andreessen was to connect the Fortune 500, Global 2000 with our portfolio companies, with the end goal being revenue and partnerships. And it was just such a fun motion where you thought, oh, this, like, talk about 1+1 = 3. And I came in, built that team out over 4 years to roughly 35 people. And it was this machine. We had a briefing center. And, if you think of it, if I could meet MasterCard and introduce them to Lyft, or if I could meet Kraft Foods and introduce them to Pinterest, like
Yeah.
what would happen? And those became early partnerships, early revenue, early biz dev relationship, just really a cool motion. So a fun time. And I looked at it as going back to venture, but not being on the investing side just yet.
And then oftentimes it's so easy to get very comfortable at companies and comfortable where you are and really not necessarily step away from yourself and say, am I growing? Am I learning? Am I, asking those questions? Do you feel, or almost how did you make sure that you're being honest with yourself and taking that leap, but also like maybe you felt you needed to do it a year earlier and you could have done it a year earlier? How do you make sure that you're doing it when you're supposed to and you're staying true to yourself and actually taking that risk?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think you refine this over time. But
Yeah.
for me, it comes back to those big three, and people, and location, and learning curve. And you can
Yeah.
feel that part of the learning curve flatten. Now, I think what teases out like great people from like, you're just getting a job, is when you feel that, like, you think it's going to be amazing to like coast for, oh, it's going to be awesome. I'm paid. I have a job. It's close to home. Like 6 months. This would be great to be on a cakewalk. I think really driven people like get bored with that fairly quickly. And you think it's going to be fun to be bored for 6 months. No, 6 weeks. And then you're like, okay, I need a new job in 6 days. Well, you just start to feel that about yourself too. Uh,
Yeah.
and there's so many things. There's, every job decision has a number of factors, and I do know that. But listen to yourself and like, and
Yeah.
push
And
yourself.
then from that operational lens, you made your jump to the investing hat. You went to 137 Ventures. And how was that experience for you? Because it was also a different model to a traditional, VC fund. So yeah, tell me about that.
So I'd known the founder. He actually, Justin was a classmate of mine and a Mayfield fellow with me in 2003. So I'd not gotten to know him. He had started the firm in 2011, and I remember him always kind of like bugging me to, oh, like, am interested in coming over. And it wasn't the right time yet for a few years, but we'd stayed in touch. Fortunately, my husband and I had been able to angel invest through this time, so I had been doing that. So I felt like at least lightly at the motion, but it was very behind the scenes, barely out at the dinner table, and mostly just in friends, engineers, people spinning out of cool companies that we were interested in being a part of. But when I started to talk to Justin about it, the 137 Ventures model is a cool part within the asset class. It's structured secondaries, so it's working with great companies that and I loved the real people focus of it. Of you're able to unlock some liquidity for early founders, early employees. I think that especially given how much of our lives are tied up in the work we do, especially in the Bay Area, how impactful that could be. So took a leap there, really fun group, and learned a ton. And I still think the asset class is fascinating.
Yeah.
It was a much more late stage investment model. because those companies that you are making secondary investments in, they're the ones that have succeeded ultimately. And some of the
Right.
ones still have growth ahead, but are later stage. And when I finally picked up my head at the start of the pandemic and said, what do I love doing and what am I best armed to do? I love that early stage motion. I love connecting and helping the founders. I love that mystery and the complexity and the hairiness of, you know, these ideas that are taking shape.
Yeah.
And I woke up in the middle of the night actually with the name Scribble and like no good, no good idea. It's nameless. And when I thought, Scribble, it's like it's so clear. Like every great idea starts with a scribble.
Yeah.
And I had
Love it.
this around me of three toddlers and a couple babies. And it was so scribble messiness, but that there's such an art that comes from that. And that's when Scribble was born.
So, okay, even the moment before Scribble, I may have heard this on another podcast, but walk me through 2019. It seems like 2019 you may have had a what the hell is happening? What will I do next? Identity crisis, however you want to coin it. Walk me through that experience and being like, you know what? I'm going for it. I'm starting my own VC fund.
Yes, great question. So I was, yes, I love the investing motion, but I'd never not had a quote unquote real job. And I think this gets back into risk taking too. I'd never really failed. I'd never taken a big risk like that before. Like I always had, a paycheck and I had a
Yeah.
place to work. And it's scary when you kind of jump and you're like, there's going to be something out there. I was terrified when I quit my job, 137. I thought I was never going to get another job again. I thought somebody must have been, erasing everything I'd ever done that could be like listed on LinkedIn. I felt like, day by day, people were extracting parts of my brain and making me absolutely obsolete.
Yeah.
And I'm terrified. And it was, not an awesome place to be. And that summer, I continued, I had space. Like finally, when you quit your job and you have space to see like what interesting things start to fall into your lap, a lot of them. And you see where you spend your time. And I noticed that I had more time for some of these founders and potentially cool angel investments. And then I found that I could do work in a way that made me proud. Like I'm super active. So I could connect with a founder while I'm out on a trail, or I could, show up in the real Elizabeth. And is that with, hey, I've got my goggles on my head because I'm getting ready to take a swim, but sure, I can help you. And
Right.
her question. And I was just so me. And when you start seeing that, like then you start getting job offers of other interesting things. You're like, I don't want that. That's not perfect. I want to do something that like really sparks me. And that was ultimately when, I'd been running this playbook with our seed portfolio. It was working. Like, why am I overthinking? What am I doing? Like, if I'm good at this and I like it, like, why not try? And the why not try was answered for me by, well, I hated selling Girl Scout cookies when I was a little kid. So why the heck would I want to raise a dime and ask anyone for money? Like, that sounds like a death job for me. Once you put together a model and something that you really believe in, you see, like you pitch it everywhere. You love what you're doing. Like, yes, you should throw your money at me. Like I'm building something magical. Scribble's going to be incredible. And all of a sudden,
Yeah.
raising motion isn't begging people for money. It's like selling my dream. I think it's going to be amazing for all of us. So why don't you, jump on this ride and be a part of it?
Wow. Such a good story. I think also at the end of the day, you didn't really have a choice but to follow your energies, right? Like but to follow your true passion. And you mentioned it before, even briefly, but the the notion of trusting your gut. And I think that isn't actually talked enough in a way, but we actually do know a lot about ourselves or what we want to do or who we want to talk to because of our gut. And I think you've been able to tap into that pretty strongly, which is I'm sure like very powerful given your role too.
Very much. And being good at what you're good at and letting those things shine and
Yeah.
looking at what axes of your life are important to you. And for me, I wanted freedom and choice. I wanted flexibility in the areas that I could control. Uh, and something that I still, and now I look back on it and I feel like as hard as it is being a working mom and busy at too many things, I'm super proud that my kids see that I built something and, mommy's the boss. And
Yeah.
they know that, they say that. I love reiterating that, like, I'm excited about my work today. And I'm excited that I get to join for, sports day for tomorrow at school. And
Yeah.
the fact that I get to choose, yet mommy's the boss is still, well, there's something really fun about that.
And Elizabeth, obviously, there's when I, look at you and talk to you, there's so many amazing aspects to your life, right? It's not even just, founder, venture capitalist, it's a mom and a runner and all these different hats that you wear. I want to even touch a bit about you mentioned how your mom, you can tell your kids, you're a freaking woman boss, however you want to call it, or just boss, honestly. But going through your career, I think about this a lot because, as women, we have this biological clock and, there's a lot of different aspects that you have to think about. Did this come into your mind or do you have advice for other young women who are like, okay, how do we think of, the timing, so raising a family, starting a family while also being incredibly driven career-wise?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question, and this is a so, individual, feeling and discussion, and yes, what
Yeah.
do you want? But I do remember, so I wasn't one of those people that, like, was, I'm so excited to have a baby, and I can't, like, it wasn't like one day I woke up and I wanted somebody to cuddle and, like, have this little, but I knew in theory I wanted children. I was like, if in theory I want children with family, then you have to start at some point, and it's
Yeah.
never a good time. Fortunately, my husband and I had been married for a few years, so we'd had the ability to, travel a little bit and work some crazy jobs. That was our Twitter time, and, do some of those things that are really fun when you could be mostly irresponsible. Uh, I look back on it now, but I was always too stressed to really be that irresponsible. But I knew in theory I wanted children. And so that was a process. And it's like you can't put them back in. And it only makes me, I will, yeah, anybody that says they're efficient, no, not until you're a parent. I very deeply believe that. Once you have multiple kids, then you're really efficient. And it is a fabric and a big part of my life that I would not want to take out of it. I think it makes me a better investor, a better human, a better wife, a better person.
Yeah.
Talk about, like, having to be true to what's important to you. Children make you do that. And it just is. And now being an investor, they're my best focus group. Like, seeing where children are. I mean, there's something magical about that too. But
Yeah.
I'm glad that when something that we've touched on a little bit, one of the things my mom very much instilled in me, and she did this because she swam masters every morning at 4:30 in the morning. She was out the door. I made my own breakfast all growing up. And she looks back on that and that was like, she still feels guilty about that. And I feel guilty about everything always. That's a given. But I have a non-negotiable every morning. I leave for my run. My kids know that mommy has to get her wiggles out. Like, that is a not non-issue. And
Yeah.
I do that every single day, and that keeps me happy, healthy, normal, and me plugging in with friends, etc. But
Yeah.
keeping some non-negotiable that really keeps you whole, even through that children cycle.
Yeah, I think I'm so happy. I was actually going to ask you about that even because I think it actually you're able to bring your best self as a mom, as an investor, as a whoever you are showing up for, for yourself. So it's like having those non-negotiables are so crucial because inherently you're actually becoming better for the ones that you're surrounding yourself with,
Entirely.
which is
And then
great.
networks of people. Now I bring my founders on walks and runs with me. And
Yeah,
I have
exactly.
confidence that if I had time for a swim this morning, it means I show up to my first Zoom with goggle marks. Like, make a joke about that. Like, don't be, and I've had
Yeah.
so much more real than I even was before, because life's too short.
I love it. I love it. Okay, Elizabeth, more fun questions. I am curious, what's your hottest take?
Oh, it depends on the day, the hour, and the rant you want to get me on. I'm out on the trails with my hottest take. Hottest take.
My hottest take? Okay, you know what? Therapy, I'll give that. So I think that I think it's fundamentally important that everyone has an outlet, right? I think it's very important that everyone has an outlet to express themselves, to share what's going on in their lives, whether it's a person, whether it's a medium, whatever it may be, something. I also feel that it's very important to either find the right therapist, but I think there is something scary about finding a therapist that doesn't have the same alignment as you or doesn't have the same incentives as you, and is looking for problems to solve rather than like sitting there and realizing I am a sounding board for you and I'm listening to you. So I think that's a pretty hot take that I don't share too often, but anyway, yeah, that's one about therapy for you.
I like that.
All right, Elizabeth, what's your superpower?
Oh, I think connecting people and connecting with people. But I love the both where you connect the people you've already connected with.
Yeah, I love it. I would agree with that one. And what craft almost are you spending a lifetime honing?
Oh gosh. A few, and something I've gotten better at, and I didn't really put weight in it either. Uh, Mindfulness and gratitude.
Ooh,
That would be one. Uh, Raising children and not feeling guilt is something I know I'm going to fail at for my whole life. But every morning I need to tell myself I'm a good mom,
wow,
and
yeah,
like having that compassion along the way. Uh, on the craft of like skill, like my letterpress business hobby, I cannot kill. And I started it nearly 20 years ago. And
wow,
still am the sole letterpress printer in the studio. And there's something that is so hands-on, right brain that I love building still. I love tinkering. All my kids make Rube Goldberg devices because they know that mommy was the 8th grade national champion Rube Goldberg device in Science Olympiad. But there's something about like knowing the way your world works by doing things. So
yeah,
uh, that letterpress art, and then I think like just a big theme is hospitality and making others better around you, bringing hospitality, taking that
yeah.
approach, look on life and all of the parts of your world. So those are a few.
Yeah, no, those are, oh, I love them. I think those are great. And I think it actually very much ties in to what your mom taught you at a young age of saying, you should know your garbage man's name and you should, all of that thing, making everyone feel special and cohesive and one and making a big world feel small. I love that. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure and just really thank you. You're incredible.
Thank you, and happy 100th episode. So proud.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Furshow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.